Hey Flutter developer, do you need to add some space between your widgets, but are tired of using SizeBox width or height depending on the layout orientation, or using the padding to add a vertical or horizontal padding? Then the gap is the right widget for you. If you stick till the end, I'll show you how you can create your own gap without needing to import any packages. In order to use gap, we need to first add it to pub/YAML by using the latest version of the gap, save it. So it's going to fetch it from pub.dev. Now we can go and use it. So as we can see in this example, we could use some space here. Let's add a gap with maybe 16 spacing. And yeah, that's how simple it is. Maybe you want to color the gap or space. So let's set the colors orange. If you save this, nothing happens. And you might ask yourself why. And that's because the gap only has height, in this case because it's a column, but not width set. So let's set cross-axis extend, which is actually the size in the opposite direction of its parent. So let's say to 32, and now we can see the box. If you change it from a column to a row, as we can see, it's still applied, but we have a small issue here. So let's just remove one text here so it's more visible and increase the gap to 32. So we have an overflow. In this case, we could use a max gap that will try to be as big as possible while trying to still fit inside its parent. So let's start by creating our own stateless gap period. It will accept in the size. We can also have the cross-axis size and also the color. Let's make them optional. We don't want to set them. Let's also define it here. Great. And we also forgot to set the size. Cool. So in order to get our parents access, we need to use the render box. In order to render the render box, we need to create a leaf render object widget. So let's start by creating the leaf render object widget. Leaf render object widget, and let's override the create render object method. We want also to pass in all the properties here. So let's do that. And let's create a structure for this. Okay, so great. So let's create the render box. We want all the properties passed in here. And let's make them not final since we want to update them so hot reload works properly. We also want the axis direction so that we can support also scrollable widgets. So axis direction. Let's create a constructor. As we can see, the size is a property from the render box. Size to be renamed, so we need to rename the size to gap size. We now need to override the perform layout. We can remove here the super, we don't need it. So we need to define the axis. We can check first the axis direction. So the axis direction is not null. We will set the axis to be axis direction. We need actually to convert the axis direction to an axis. So let's create a method for that. And let's switch the axis direction. nullable. So if it's up and down, we'll return axis direction vertical, and if it's right or left, we will return axis horizontal. Yeah, we need to force unwrap it here. Now we can check if the parent is render flex. If the parent is a render flex, we can take its direction. Okay, now that we have a direction, let's use it. If the axis is equal to axis dot vertical, let's set the size of this gap render box to be, in this case, width should be 0 and height should be the gap size. And else, if it's axis dot horizontal, let's set the size to be reversed. So yeah. Cool. So basically now we have the render box ready. Let's override paint so that we can also draw the color if we have set it. It's not null, then we can create a paint object. Set the color to be the color that we have passed in. And we can say context.canvas.draw rect. And we can just use the offset and size and set the paint. So if you're confused what's happening here, how we can create size and offset into a rectangle, you're right. But there's a nice helper method defined in the rect object that we can create a rect using the offset and size by the AND operator. So that's really nice. Great. So we finished with the render box. Let's actually return the render box in the leaf render object and see what happens. Let's set the size, the cross-axis alignment, the color. And yeah, as we said, we need also to set the axis direction if you want to support scrollable views. Okay, let's do that by checking if there is a scrollable object. And getting its axis direction if it's there. Now we can pass it here. Great. And we are almost ready to use the gap. So let's return the leaf render object widget. Again, passing in the size, cross-axis size, and color. And now our gap is ready to be used. So let's put it in a row and see if that works. We can set the size to be maybe 16. Yeah, works nice. And let's set also the cross axis size to maybe 32. Okay, and let's set the color to be red. Okay, so something's not working properly, and that's because we are passing cross-axis size here. Yeah, while we're here, let's make this not a named parameter. So it's easier for us here just to write the size. It's better. So what's happening here is that we set the size to be 0. So basically the height or the width to be 0. In order to change that, we need to use the cross-axis size. And since it's nullable, let's say the default value is 0. We save it now and do a hot reload. we should see the height working properly. As we saw, the hot restart didn't work, so we need to override the update render object and actually do update the object here. It's data. Let's update the render object and set its color. Let's set the cross-axis size. Let's set the size. And we can also update the axis direction if you want to respond to layout changes from column to row or vice versa. Yeah, so it's complaining about the size. We need to set the gap size. Yeah, so this should support hot restart now. Let's check that. If we say it's 16, yeah, works pretty fine, I would say. Let's see if this works also for a column. Yeah, looks nice. And what about the list? Let's add it as the every even item should be a gap. So let's do that. So we're checking if you're dividing the index by 2. If the remainder is 0, we will return a gap. Okay, so let's see if this works. So this does work, but if you're looking at the logs here, we're getting some issues about that the debug is not set. And this is partially true, but the error, if you scroll to the top, has to do with the constraints not being properly set. So it's expecting it to be 360 and our width is 16 because the list view takes up the whole width of its parent. So in order to fix that and also the wrong error here that we see at the bottom, it's good to override the debug fill properties so that we have a bit more detailed output in the console. So let's add the properties that we're using in this render box. So let's add a property. Let's start with the gap size. Okay, let's add now the cross-axis size. Let's see what we have. We have also the color and the axis direction. So since the axis direction doesn't exist as a property, we can set it as a string action direction. String and use it as a string property. So let's see now if we do a clean of the console and do a reload. As we see, we get a much clearer error that the render reprint boundary doesn't meet its constraints. So it's always good to override the debug for properties. And let's fix the issue with the sizing. So in order to fix the sizing, we need to check if the axis direction is set, because this means that the widget is a scroll widget. So if it's null, we can use the cross-axis size. Otherwise, we can use the constraints dot min width. And also, let's do it here. If the axis direction is null, we will use the cross-axis size. Otherwise, we need to use the constraints dot min height. If you save it now, also clear the console, we can see also do a reload just to check. So we see that we don't have any issues now and that the gap works also fine here. If you like my content and want to see more, please consider subscribing to my channel and sharing my content. Thanks, and until next time.